All right, so you're really diving deep into sea level rise this time. Looks like you've sent us a whole stack of material.
Yeah, there's a lot here. Educational resources, scientific reports,
Oh, for sure.
some case studies, too, from places that are already dealing with the impacts
Wow. Yeah,
firsthand.
that's a lot to unpack. Our mission today is to sort of cut through all of that and really get to the core of what's important. Like, what are the key takeaways from all these different sources? So, we'll dig into the science behind sea level rise. We'll look at the consequences through some different perspectives and then see how it connects to, everyday life.
Yeah, and I think there's some really cool stuff in here. Like, did you know that when glaciers melt, it can actually change ocean currents?
Oh, wow.
And some communities are using virtual reality to, try to prepare for higher sea levels.
I did not know that.
And,
I'm
well,
excited to learn more about that.
yeah.
But first, let's take a step back and define things. When we talk about sea level rise, what are we actually talking about?
Basically, it's the increase in the average height of the ocean over time.
Okay.
Simple as that. Kind of like if you're filling up a bathtub.
Right.
But instead of a faucet, we've got melting glaciers, and we're also heating up the water itself.
Okay, so two main culprits. Melting ice and what was that second one again?
Oh, thermal expansion.
Right.
Just means that as water warms up, it takes up more space.
Makes sense.
And, the ocean's been absorbing something like 90% of the excess heat that gets trapped by those greenhouse gases.
So it's like the Earth's giant heat sink.
Pretty much. Yeah, like a pot of water on the stove. You turn up the heat, the water level rises.
Hmm.
Same idea, just on a planetary scale.
Okay, and on top of that, all those glaciers and ice sheets are melting at an alarming rate, adding even more water to the mix.
Exactly. And this isn't something that's happening slowly over centuries either.
Right.
That rate of sea level rise has actually sped up like 66% in just the last 5 years
Wow. 66%.
compared to, what we were seeing in past centuries. So that's a big jump.
That is a huge increase. What's driving that acceleration?
Well, a few things. Mainly, the rate of ice melt has really shot up, especially in Greenland and Antarctica. And since that ocean's constantly soaking up more heat, thermal expansion just keeps adding to the problem.
So warmer water taking up more space, plus more water from those melting glaciers. It's like a double whammy for all our coastlines.
Yeah, exactly. And those consequences are pretty far-reaching.
Right.
Impacts everything from ecosystems to economies and even cultures.
Speaking of impacts, the TCI curriculum, they use these three lenses to look at the consequences: ecological, sociocultural, and economic.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
It seems like a helpful framework to sort of, wrap our heads around such a complex issue.
Definitely. Let's start with that ecological lens. Think about beaches eroding away. Crucial coastal habitats like salt marshes, those are disappearing too. And the whole balance of marine life gets disrupted.
Salt marshes, those are the grassy areas you see along the coast, right?
Yeah,
What
exactly.
makes those so important?
They do so much. They're like nurseries for tons of fish and shellfish. They help protect the coastline from erosion, and they filter out pollutants too. So when they start to disappear, it has this ripple effect on the whole ecosystem.
So it's not just about losing a little bit of pretty scenery then, it's like a domino effect on the whole web of life along the coast.
Right. And it goes beyond the plants and smaller creatures, too.
Yeah.
Think about walruses and polar bears that depend on those ice platforms to hunt and rest.
Right.
As those platforms melt and break apart, it really threatens their survival.
And I remember reading about how those disappearing ice platforms can impact ocean currents too. How does that work?
Yeah, so when those huge chunks of ice melt and flow into the ocean, they can mess with the balance of saltiness and temperature that controls those currents. And those currents are super important for global weather patterns and fisheries, so any changes can have some pretty big impacts.
It's like throwing a wrench in the Earth's whole climate system then.
A very good analogy. Now, if we switch over to that sociocultural lens, imagine whole communities forced to move because the sea's encroaching on their homes and their way of life.
Right.
And for indigenous communities with deep ties to their land, that can mean losing their cultural identity and traditions.
We're already seeing that happening in places like Louisiana, right? Communities having to relocate, losing homes, livelihoods, that connection to a place that's been part of their culture for generations.
Absolutely, and this brings up a really important point. Sea level rise isn't just an environmental issue, it's a social justice issue too. Often, the communities that contribute the least to climate change are the ones hit hardest by these impacts.
Yeah.
They often have fewer resources to adapt or relocate, making them more vulnerable to the consequences.
It's heartbreaking to think about that human cost. And it's not just homes and livelihoods at risk, it's historical and culturally significant sites, too.
Exactly. Imagine ancient ruins, landmarks, sacred sites, all being swallowed up by the rising tides.
It's a loss of our shared history and a reminder that sea level rise impacts far more than just the physical landscape.
Absolutely.
This is all starting to feel incredibly complex and interconnected.
It is. And we haven't even gotten to the economic impacts yet. Think about all the cost of repairing and protecting infrastructure, the loss of tax revenue as properties become uninhabitable, and the disruption of industries like tourism and fishing.
Not to mention the effects on housing markets and insurance premiums. It's a ripple effect that touches almost every part of our lives.
Exactly. And again, those economic consequences often hit certain communities harder than others, bringing that climate justice issue back into focus.
It seems like understanding the consequences through all three of those lenses paints a much clearer picture of the problem.
Definitely.
But honestly, it's also a bit overwhelming. Where do we even start to tackle something this big?
Well, I think one way is to see what other people are already doing. Those case studies you sent are a great place to start. They show how different communities are dealing with these challenges, and some of them have come up with some really creative solutions.
Yeah, I was particularly interested in that one about a community in Baltimore that's using virtual reality to help residents visualize what could happen with higher sea levels. That's such a cool way to bring the issue to life.
It is, right? It's so much more impactful than just looking at a graph or reading a report. By actually experiencing the potential consequences firsthand in VR, people can connect with the issue in a deeper way and maybe feel more motivated to take action.
It makes a lot of sense. But speaking of data, I think it's time we dug into some of the numbers behind sea level rise.
Definitely, yeah.
Data can tell a really powerful story and help us make more informed decisions.
Absolutely.
So, do we have a specific data set or graph we could look at?
We do. We've got a simple graph showing sea level rise over time.
Okay.
It might not seem very flashy, but it really reveals some important trends.
Okay, I'm ready to put on my data detective hat and see what this data has to say.
All right, so take a look at this graph. The x-axis, that's time measured in years. And the y-axis, that's the global mean sea level in millimeters.
Got it. And that line on the graph is clearly trending upwards, showing that sea level is definitely rising. But by how much? And how quickly is it happening?
Those are the key questions. And this graph helps us answer them. If we look closely, we see that sea level has risen roughly 80 millimeters over the past 25 years.
So a little over 3 millimeters per year then.
You got it.
Yeah.
Which, to put it in perspective, that's about an inch of sea level rise every 8 years. Might not seem like a lot year to year, but over time it really adds up.
And we have to remember this is just the average global rate of change, right?
Yeah.
Some areas are seeing even faster rates of sea level rise, depending on things like ocean currents and what they call land subsidence.
Yeah, land subsidence basically means the land is sinking, often caused by things like groundwater extraction. And when the land sinks, it makes the effects of rising sea levels even worse, making those areas way more vulnerable to flooding.
So it's not like sea level rise is uniform all across the globe.
Right.
It's like this patchwork of different rates and contributing factors, which makes it even more complicated to figure out.
Absolutely. Understanding those variations is super important for coming up with effective strategies to adapt and mitigate those effects.
So where do we go from here? I mean, we've talked about the science, the consequences, the data. It all feels a bit overwhelming. What can we actually do about it?
That's the big question. And it's one we'll definitely be diving deeper into as we continue. But it's good to remember, knowledge is the first step towards action.
Okay, so we have the knowledge now. What can we do with that power?
You'll have to stay tuned to find out. We'll be uncovering some really inspiring examples of community action and exploring how you can be part of the solution.
Yeah, it's easy to feel kind of powerless when you're faced with a global challenge like sea level rise.
Right.
But the important thing to remember is that even small actions can make a difference.
So knowledge is that first step. But what comes next? What can people actually do to make a difference? Well, one really powerful approach is community action.
Okay.
By working together at a local level, we can create tangible change and start building that resilience.
I love that. It's about empowering people to take ownership, and be a part of the solution. What are some examples of community action that you've seen in the materials?
The TCI curriculum has some really inspiring examples of student-led projects.
Okay.
One that stood out to me was using photojournalism to document the local impacts of sea level rise.
Oh, that's cool. So they're basically capturing those changes happening right in their own backyard.
Exactly.
What a powerful way to raise awareness.
It is. And they're not just documenting the problem, they're starting conversations and inspiring action within their communities. Another project involved interviewing longtime residents, fishermen, town officials to gather what's called local ecological knowledge.
Oh, that's interesting. Like
Yeah.
tapping into this living history of the coastline, those stories and insights must be so valuable.
They are. This kind of knowledge, passed down through generations, it can actually complement the scientific data and help communities come up with better adaptation strategies. And it's not just interviews and photos either. Students are getting creative with climate fiction writing, art installations to visualize sea level rise, and even community data collection initiatives.
Wow, so they're really tapping into storytelling and creative expression to engage their communities.
They are.
That's awesome. What a great way to connect people to the issue on a personal level.
Yeah, and it's not just about the projects themselves. It's about empowering those young people to become informed, engaged citizens who are passionate about creating a better future.
I'm getting fired up just hearing about this. But before we unleash this tidal wave of community action,
Uh-huh.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, creating a communication campaign to raise awareness about sea level rise.
Oh, that's a fantastic idea. And it ties in perfectly with everything we've been talking about with community action. A well-designed campaign can educate, inspire, and really mobilize people to get involved.
Totally agree. It's taking all this knowledge we've gained and turning it into a force for change.
Yeah.
So let's brainstorm for a minute. Imagine you're tasked with creating a communication campaign for your own community.
Right.
What's your vision?
All right, challenge accepted. First, I'd want to really figure out who my target audience is. Who am I trying to reach with this? Is it policymakers, business owners, or maybe just the general public?
Good point. That messaging and the approach would have to be tailored to each specific group to really make an impact.
Exactly.
What about the message itself? What would you want to get across?
I think it's crucial to find that balance, conveying the urgency of the problem, but not completely overwhelming people with doom and gloom.
Right, right.
Highlight the potential consequences of doing nothing, for sure, but also emphasize that we still have time to act and that solutions are actually within reach.
Absolutely. It's about empowering people to feel like they can make a difference, not just scaring them into inaction.
Yeah, for sure.
What kind of visuals or storytelling techniques would you use to really grab people's attention?
Compelling visuals are definitely key.
Yeah.
I'd want to use imagery that showcases the beauty of our coastlines,
Right.
the impacts that sea level rise is already having, and the innovative solutions that are being implemented. I'd also incorporate those personal stories from community members, show their resilience and determination.
Those personal stories are so powerful. They help people connect on a human level,
For sure.
They realize it's not just some abstract concept. It's impacting real lives.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd use things like social media, local events, partnerships with community organizations to get that message out there and reach as many people as possible.
Great. So what about a call to action? What specific things would you encourage people to do?
That's so important. Raising awareness is great, but we also need to give people concrete ways to get involved. So I'd encourage them to contact their elected officials, advocate for policies that address climate change and support coastal resilience, highlight ways to reduce their own carbon footprint, support local organizations working on these issues, and participate in community initiatives like beach cleanups or habitat restoration projects.
So it's this multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
Educate, inspire, empower, and activate.
Exactly. And I think the key to a successful campaign is making it relevant to people's daily lives. We need to connect sea level rise to the things they care about, whether it's their favorite beach, local seafood, or just the future of their community.
Such a good point. It's about making it personal, showing people they have a stake in finding solutions.
Yeah.
This has been such an insightful conversation. We've explored the science, the consequences, the data, and the power of community action.
It really has been a fascinating deep dive, and hopefully we've given our listener a solid understanding of this complex issue and inspired them to take some action.
I think so. But before we wrap up, I just want to say that the learning shouldn't stop here.
No, not at all.
The TCI curriculum and all those resources you sent are full of even more information, tools, and inspiration to help on this journey.
Definitely. Don't let those resources just sit there gathering dust. Dive in, explore the links, and connect with other passionate individuals and organizations that are working to address sea level rise. You're not alone in this.
Absolutely. There's a whole community out there ready to roll up their sleeves and work together for a more resilient future.
That's right.
And by sharing knowledge, supporting each other, and staying hopeful, we can face the challenges of sea level rise head on and create a brighter future for generations to come.
I agree.
This deep dive into sea level rise has been truly inspiring.
It has.
We've learned so much, and I really hope you, our listener, are feeling empowered to take action and be part of the solution.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey of discovery.
Yeah, it really is amazing to think about how one small action, even just a conversation, can start this ripple effect.
I know.
Or just a change in how we think about things.
Yeah, for sure. It all comes down to awareness and understanding, first and foremost, and then turning that knowledge into something real, whether it's personal changes, community efforts, or pushing for bigger policy shifts.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect place to start wrapping up our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We've covered so much ground, from the science behind those rising sea levels to those big impacts we're already seeing on ecosystems, communities, and economies around the world.
And we've seen some inspiring examples of what people are doing about it.
Right.
From those innovative ways to adapt to the really powerful campaigns that are raising awareness and pushing for change.
And at the end of the day, that's what this whole deep dive has been about, giving you, our listener, the knowledge and the inspiration to make a difference.
Exactly. You have the power to be part of the solution, whether it's cutting down your own carbon footprint, supporting local organizations working on making our coasts more resilient, or speaking up for policy changes. Every little thing counts.
Absolutely. And don't forget, that TCI curriculum and all those resources you sent us, they're packed with even more information, tools, and inspiration to help you along the way.
Don't let those resources just sit there.
Right.
Go explore those links. Connect with others who are passionate about this. There's a whole community out there. You don't have to do this alone.
That's so true. There are so many people who are ready to roll up their sleeves and get to work, building a better future for everyone.
I love that.
And by sharing what we know, supporting each other, and holding on to that hope, we can face these challenges head on. We can create a brighter future for generations to come. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been incredible.
It has been a journey. Thanks for having me.